COVID-19 is surging once again worldwide, and here in Europe, urban centers are at the forefront of the wave. From Marseille to Munich, Paris to Prague, the continent's cities are rushing to impose new rules, ranging from prohibitions on parties and closure of bars to curfews and travel bans. Restrictions on public life still fall short of last spring's lockdowns, for now. As the world waits for a vaccine, can the virus be stopped? Our title, Coronavirus Hotspots. Are Europe's cities out of control? And it is a pleasure to introduce our guests, starting with Mair. He works as a science editor for the German radio broadcaster Deutschlandfunk. And he believes, despite scientific progress, the pandemic will prevail. Therefore, we will have to get along with further restrictions. And it's a pleasure to introduce Mira Fricke. He works as a science editor for the Berlin daily Tagesspiegel. And he says, we are only at the beginning of the cold and indoor season, and there is a real danger of things getting out of hand in some places. And I'm pleased to welcome our colleague, Mira Fricke. She's a science reporter and editor here at DW, and she's convinced egoism won't get us through the pandemic. So let me ask you, Mair, the pandemic will prevail, as you said in your opening statement, sounds pretty ominous. We have worldwide nearly 40 million cases now, 100,000 new infections per day here in Europe. How worried should we be?
I think we should be worried. I think the next weeks will be very challenging for all of us, because what we see is we had a feeling maybe that the situation is in control over the summer. Unfortunately, it's not. This pandemic did not stop. We are in the middle of the second wave. The numbers go up. At some places, they explode, and that is worrisome.
Mira, that number I just quoted for Europe means it now accounts for about 1/3 of cases worldwide, though it certainly doesn't account for that share of the global population. So what is the reason for this rather dubious distinction for Europe?
I think we're not quite sure at the moment yet. I think it will take a lot of time still also after the pandemic to analyze what went wrong, where were the turning points for certain regions, what was the decisive factor. I think at the moment it's still a lot of guessworking. But I mean, what we can see is that Europe is generally, we have a lot of hotspots with dense population that definitely causes problems. But I mean, there are other places in the world where the population is equally dense, and maybe they're handling it better than Europe. So we will have to see.
Friebe, your opening statement mentions the change of season. In summer here in Europe, things almost seemed normal, and I think perhaps a lot of us got lulled into a sense of false security. Was this second wave that we're seeing an inevitable result of colder weather, or would you say that mistakes were made?
I think mistakes were made. Opportunities were not taken the way they could have been taken. Like, you know, I remember in late spring, early summer, people started to talk about Corona in the past tense, actually, like it's disappeared. We had so much of an urge to get back to our normal ways, and a lot of opportunities were missed, especially in trying to limit the number of infections as we go into the cold season. It's kind of, I mean, scary is a big word, but I think it's reasonable to call it scary that we already now are seeing this surge in cases. We could have done better. We could have gone into the fall season with much less infection and with much better preparation.
Mair, many people thought that Germany was the poster child for handling Corona, and in fact it did significantly better than many of its neighbors dealing with the first wave of infection. How are things looking now?
I don't think we've ever been the poster child, to be honest. I think we've been very lucky, especially in the beginning, because we had more time. The virus was spreading in other parts of Europe, so we had more time to prepare for our measures. And then I'd say the German government did a lot of things. They did a good job in a lot of ways, I would say, in general. And especially the Germans themselves, they sticked to the measures. Now we see we are tired. I think we all are. I personally am as well. I want to go back to normal. It's not possible. But that is really something that it's very stressful. So I don't think that we in Germany should be in any way proud or prouder than anyone in the rest of the world, because it's a pandemic. The word means we're in this together.
Let's talk a little bit about that stress that Martin just mentioned. He also mentioned the fact that having information played a big role in the spring in helping Germany to respond quickly and effectively. At this point, I think many people are beginning to feel overwhelmed by the constant media drumbeat of information, of new findings, of suggestions and recommendations. Is there a risk, do you think, Mira, that this can backfire and make people perhaps less willing to take action and almost become defeatist?
I mean, we know very well from neuroscience that if we bombard people with information, with the same information, or with also shocking information, scary information, they will shut down at some point and not take that information as serious as we should. And we might have a little bit of that effect at the moment. I think it is also a huge problem that we are sometimes not consistent enough with what we expect people to do and what we recommend. And I think that this inconsistency can also cause some confusion, or this kind of people wanting to, oh, now they come up with yet another thing, oh, they come up with yet another thing, and not trying to listen carefully what people or authorities recommend.
Let's take a deeper dive on what it is that we're expecting people to do. We are seeing a plethora not only of new numbers, but also of new rules. So let's take a quick virtual trip to see how some of Europe's cities are coping and what regulations they're putting into place.
Hotspot Madrid. A partial lockdown has been imposed on the Spanish capital and surrounding municipalities. This affects a good 4 million people. Only those who have to go to work or to a doctor are allowed to leave. Madrid is responsible for around 1/3 of coronavirus infections in the country, so the central government feels justified for issuing the state of emergency. Maximum alert level in Paris. Cafes and bars are closed. Strict hygiene rules have been introduced in restaurants. Alcohol consumption in public spaces is prohibited, as are large parties. The latest measure is evening curfews, and more restrictions may be coming. Berlin is counting on a curfew. Bars, restaurants, and shops must now shut down between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. No more than 5 people are allowed to meet at once, and parties are considered to be the prime culprits of a pandemic. I actually wanted to celebrate my 20th birthday today, and I was really looking forward to it. With the curfew, it's really a pity that you can't live here as freely now. Will the future of the pandemic be decided in big cities?
Let me pass that question straight on to Richard Friebe. Will the battle against corona be decided in cities, and if so, why?
Well, I mean, we see the rise in cases now in the cities. There's a lot of reasons for that. People living closer together, but also the availability of testing, maybe a population that's more conscious of the problem. So certainly we're now seeing a lot of the cases there, but it could spread, especially because awareness in the countryside sometimes seems to be not as high. So it's a very complex situation and nobody really knows the answers. That's also true for what measures work well, what measures work best during the lockdowns in spring and early summer. A lot of measures were taken at the same time, so it's really hard to distinguish what worked best. Were the school closures decisive? Were the masks decisive? All we know is that everything kind of worked together. There might have been some of those measures that didn't contribute much to it, but we will have no other choice than probably going back to some of those things which in concert were able to limit the numbers. As I said, or as you said in the beginning, we are facing the cold season. We had the big advantage in the spring that weather got better, people could, under those restrictions, go outside more. I mean, we're now only in the mid of October and it might get worse.
I want to get all of you to parse the different measures in a moment, but let's stay with the question of cities just for a second. And Martin, certainly President Macron of France sees cities as decisive. Yesterday evening on Wednesday, he ordered a nighttime curfew for Paris and 8 other French cities, saying this, quote, "We won't be leaving restaurants anymore after 9 p.m. and we won't be partying with our friends." Do measures like these and those we saw in that report, do they make sense? Do they strike the right balance, would you say?
Well, in the end, all these measures follow one big idea, and this idea is to keep people apart, keep social distancing, and not have big gatherings. And of course, you can argue, what do you do? Do you have a curfew for pubs, for restaurants? Do you say that big weddings aren't allowed anymore? Things like that. In France, the situation got really worse over the last weeks, or the last days especially, and I think that's why Macron did that. I think no politician is happy to step in front of his people and say, like, let's close everything, especially in Paris, where eating out is such an important thing. So it is a balance we have to discuss, but I think this strict balance, we don't need that in Germany right now, but we have other measures as well, that in certain areas the pubs close at 11. I do think that's a good idea.
But I think we have to just to add to that, we have to really monitor how people are reacting to these curfews. You know, when they end up drinking in the streets, crowding up in a different place instead, then we have 1-0 here. So I think we really have to see how different, even cultures react to that, because I think there can be a difference. Some people might respond to that quite well and it might work, and in other countries it might not work because people have a different mentality. I think we cannot forget about that.
Let's talk a little more about that, because your opening statement mentioned egoism and the importance that people take responsibility, essentially not only for themselves but for each other. So at the end of the report, we saw that young man in Berlin who was disappointed at not being able to celebrate his birthday. How can we reach young people? Because it does seem that young people are increasingly becoming the spreader generation, the 20 to 30-year-olds, I think, in particular. What do you think is a way to get them not to be egoistic?
I think we have to make people aware of the consequences of their behavior. And I think it's always good to say, yeah, you might not be so severely infected that you need to go on, a respiratory device, or that you need like intensive care help, but you have potentially a lot of people in your close surrounding that might as well have that problem, and you might be responsible for actually killing a person by infecting it. I mean, I think we have to be that drastic to make that comparison. And I think also we always talk about the elderly, right? We want to, the elderly are going to die, and, your grandma might get infected. But I think it's really important to say the risk group is not the elderly. The risk group is also a lot of people with comorbidities, with asthma, for example.
With pre-existing conditions.
Exactly. Yeah. There are a lot of young people with asthma as well. And I think we've already seen that some people who have asthma and contract the virus and go through COVID-19, that they come down with really harsh long-term effects of this sickness.
Richard, one country that we didn't see in our report, but that is quite notable, is Italy. It was at the absolute crest of the first wave of COVID in Europe, with disastrous consequences for the health system. Many of our viewers will remember the pictures of the Italian nurses and doctors breaking down. Now, the situation there is looking better than in many other European countries. What is Italy doing right? Can we learn from them?
It's very hard to tell, I think the experience there, the harsh experience, was a lesson that they still very much remember. Their lesson was very decisive for us to take measures in the spring. So I really don't know. There is, as I said, it's very complex. Chance might be involved as well. You know, the structure of the population. Maybe older people taking better care of themselves as before, or being taken care better by their families. So it's really hard to pinpoint one particular thing, I think.
Martin, both Bavaria's president and also the mayor of Berlin, who are not exactly on the same political wavelength most of the time, both say they're not ruling out that we may see still more severe restrictions imposed in Germany, including even a lockdown once again. Can you really envisage that happening here, particularly given the economic impact it would have? The Chancellor said it must be avoided at all costs.
It should be avoided for a lot of reasons, for economical reasons, for social reasons as well, because we sometimes tend to forget that a lot of people were locked away, elderly people in care homes. That's also a big effect we, I think, shouldn't forget. I actually don't know. I hope it's not going to be like we've had in Germany, like the situation we've had at the beginning of this pandemic, but it is not a given fact that it's not going to happen. The chances are there that we still or might face another lockdown.
Mair, the Chancellor has also been saying that she absolutely wants to keep schools open, that it's very important not to sacrifice the educational well-being and social well-being of children. Will Germany and will Europe be able to do that going forward, do you think? What's the latest finding on the degree to which schools are spreaders?
I think there's not yet very strong scientific evidence that schools are the origin of big infection clusters. I think that we can say that it looks like they are not reason number one, which then, again, is a reason to keep them open, especially for smaller children. I think it is totally possible to find a good balance, teaching some children in school, having a little bit of homeschooling for others, have some kind of maybe a shift system where they come in every second day, or where the younger ones go to class, where the older ones rather stay at home. I think it's absolutely possible to keep schools open with a reasonable hygiene concept.
And another point where there's perhaps a lesson to be learned from how things were dealt with in the first wave of the virus, Richard, it was every country for itself at that time. Borders were closed, national authorities scrambled to get hold of masks and equipment, sometimes at the expense of others who needed them more. Since then, there have been a lot of vows to not have that repeat itself. What do you think? Will we see better coordination and cooperation amongst different countries in Europe and also amongst different cities than we did during the first wave? And I'm thinking especially about the sharing of hospital capacity, for example.
I mean, again, experience is a plus on this side. I mean, we've started doing this kind of coordination in the spring. I think it's going to work better, but it also is also going to depend on the extent of this, on the severity of the pandemic. So things may get out of hand just because, you know, medical personnel in large numbers will not be able to cope anymore. They've gone through it before. So I think coordination is key, but it's hard really to predict how much you can count on it.
Speaking of cooperation, let's take a quick look at the state of vaccine research. It is proceeding apace, yet even under the best-case scenario, Europe's cities will have to manage the virus for some time to come. Here's a closer look at the timeline for one project based here in Germany.
An ad by BioNTech. The Mainz-based biotechnology firm could soon become the first German company to produce its genetically engineered vaccine by the millions, with its US partner, Pfizer. That's because BioNTech is currently in the third critical phase of vaccine testing with 37,000 volunteer test subjects, and an accelerated EU approval process is already underway. At the moment, research is moving at an incredible speed. Currently, the Ministry for Research expects that large portions of the population will be able to be vaccinated by the middle of next year. 2 other German pharmaceutical manufacturers are competing with BioNTech. And not only that, the World Health Organization lists 180 active vaccine programs, of which at least 8 are in the third phase of testing. We see this less as a race against each other and more as one to get the pandemic under control. There will be several rounds of approval. But competition has been raging about when each country will receive the vaccine.
Mira, what do you think? Which country or which company will win the competition? And your opening statement mentioned egoism. So let me ask you how cutthroat you think that this vaccine competition is likely to become.
I'm going to be honest and say I really, really hope it's not going to be a cutthroat situation that we will encounter. I really hope that everyone will see that it makes absolutely no sense in this pandemic, that we have to work together, that we have to really think about what is best for everyone, no matter in which country they are living. I do think that Pfizer and BioNTech is a good candidate to maybe bring one of the first vaccines in Europe onto the market. But we will see. Something can always happen in a trial phase.
Martin, we heard a pretty optimistic prognosis there from the German research minister that large segments of the population here could be vaccinated by the middle of next year. Would you share that optimism?
No, I wouldn't. I'm not that sure. I'm not so sure. I think in the end we'll have more than one vaccine that will come to an end. At the moment, the WHO says about more than a dozen are in the clinical third phase of the important phase of the testing. But still, then this vaccine has to be produced. And then we have to think, we have to make a call. Who is more important to get the vaccine first? Elderly, maybe, people who work in hospitals, I'd say. But I'm not that sure, as our minister is, that this will be for everyone or almost everyone.
Richard, Martin and our report both mentioned the third phase. That is usually seen as pretty far along in the testing process, but the U.S. company Johnson & Johnson just interrupted phase 3 trials because a participant unexpectedly became ill. Now, does that mean that phase 3 is perhaps less decisive and more fragile than many people have led us to believe?
Well, I mean, it's always going to be the situation in phase 3. Something will happen. The problem with the current situation is that we have speeded up things so much. So there will also be trade-offs, and the trade-offs will be maybe vaccines that are less effective than they could have been if we had 3 years to development. Another trade-off might be when even larger groups of people get a vaccine after it's been approved, that there might be serious problems with it. So those trade-offs are going to be there. To look at a possible vaccine or a group of vaccines as the big solution to the whole crisis is a little bit short-sighted, I would think.
Then let me come back to our title for one very quick final round to all of you, and it's this. In view of that fact, in view of the fact that we're clearly going to be, this virus is going to be with us for a number of months to come, what for you is the most crucial thing we can do to get it under control? Coming back to our title. Mira, most crucial measure.
I think every one of us should be aware that they make a difference. Every single one of us makes a difference. We have to be proactive, not reactive. And I would always say, just wear your mask.
Martin?
I would totally agree, and then I would just add that I think we all have to ask ourselves these days, do we really need to travel now? Is that really the most important thing at the moment? Or should we sometimes just limit ourselves, as annoying it is, as stressful it is, but I think it's the only thing we can do.
A big discussion right now here in Germany with people looking to go on fall break and using corona testing capacity to try to get the means to do so. Richard?
I completely agree with both of you. I think we have to embrace the situation with all its insecurities, and also the fact that we can make a difference. We can be solidaric with other people by just acting responsibly, wearing masks, keeping distance, not overdoing partying, things like that.
The Robert Koch Institute, Germany's leading, essentially, Center for Disease Control, says that a mask could be as important as a vaccine, if not more so. Would you agree with that?
I think the mask is what we have now, and it's proven to be very effective. So let's stick with the mask for now.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being with us, and thanks to you for tuning in. See you soon.